Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
You know, one of the hardest lessons I ever learned in life wasn't about courage or leadership or even vulnerability. It was about boundaries, about realizing that people will treat you how you let them. And that setting the standard for how you deserve to be treated isn't arrogance. It's self-respect. But it took me years to figure that out. When I was younger, I used to think kindness meant never upsetting anyone. I believed that if I was nice enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, people would automatically know how to treat me. I thought love meant saying yes. I thought peace meant staying quiet. But here's what I didn't understand back then. Every time I said yes, when my soul whispered no, I was abandoning myself. I was teaching people that my boundaries were optional, that my needs didn't matter as much as their comfort. I remember a season in my life when I felt constantly drained. I was doing everything right, showing up for people, helping, listening, fixing, and yet I'd go to bed feeling hollow, resentful, quietly angry. And I didn't even know who to be angry at. Was it them for asking too much, or me for giving too freely? One day I was sitting with a friend, and I heard myself say, "I'm just tired of people walking all over me." And she looked at me and said, gently but firmly, "Maybe you're the one laying down the welcome mat." That hit hard, because she was right. Here's the truth I learned the hard way. People don't always know your boundaries unless you teach them. They don't automatically sense when you're uncomfortable or when they've gone too far. Most of the time, people act from their own understanding, their own habits. It's not necessarily cruelty. It's just a lack of clarity, and clarity is kindness. See, boundaries aren't there to punish or control others. They're not walls built from fear. They're bridges built from truth. They're a way of saying, this is how I need to be treated so I can stay whole. When you set a boundary, you're not pushing someone away. You're inviting them to meet you in a space where love and respect can exist. It took me a long time to understand that boundaries are not about shutting people out. They're about keeping yourself intact. You can love people deeply and still say, this isn't okay. You can care for someone and still say, I need space. You can be compassionate and still say, I deserve peace. That's not selfishness. That's self-respect in action. And the moment you start honoring your boundaries, something shifts inside you. The resentment starts to fade. The exhaustion begins to lift. You start breathing easier, walking taller, and realizing you never had to sacrifice your well-being to keep love alive. Because love, real love, thrives in honesty. It cannot survive where one person has to disappear to keep the other comfortable. So if you've been feeling like people don't see your limits, maybe it's time to stop expecting them to guess. Maybe it's time to speak your truth out loud. Because when you stop saying yes out of fear and start saying no out of love, you stop performing kindness and start practicing courage. And that changes everything. Here's something I want you to really sit with, because it's a truth most of us avoid facing. Every time you tolerate something that disrespects you, you lower the standard for how others can treat you. I remember a time in my life when I was working with someone who constantly spoke over me, dismissed my ideas, and questioned my judgment. And every single time it happened, I would apologize for being too sensitive, or I'd rationalize their behavior, telling myself, they're under pressure. They don't mean it. And every time I stayed silent, I was teaching them that it was okay. I was teaching them that my voice, my presence, my value was optional. We often think that being kind or easy to work with means letting people overstep, letting them push the limits, letting them take more than they give. But the truth is, kindness without boundaries is a kind of violence against yourself. You cannot control what other people do. You cannot make someone suddenly respect you. You cannot make someone suddenly see your value, but you can decide what behavior you will and will not accept in your life. That's power. That's agency. That's self-respect. I've learned over and over again that there's a difference between forgiveness and tolerance. Forgiveness is a gift you give to someone who wronged you. Tolerance is silently saying to yourself and to the world that disrespect is acceptable. And I know how hard it is to speak up. It feels risky. It feels uncomfortable. especially when we fear losing someone or being rejected or being labeled as difficult. But here's the hard truth: when you tolerate disrespect, you don't just lose your voice, you lose a part of yourself. I think about the people in my life who unknowingly lowered my standards for them by my silence. And I feel the weight of it. The times I should have said, "That's not okay," but I didn't. And then I remember the relief, the liberation, the deep breath of clarity that comes the first time you finally do say it. You see, when you stop over-explaining your worth, when you stop begging people to treat you decently, something miraculous happens. You start to feel lighter. You start to recognize who really belongs in your life and who's just taking up space. You start to understand that respect isn't a favor, it's a requirement. And here's the most important part: people will rise to meet the standards you set. Some will stumble, some will leave, and some will surprise you in ways you never expected. But your standards will never fail you. They are your compass, guiding you toward relationships that honor you, toward people who value you, toward a life that doesn't feel like a constant negotiation of your worth. So tonight, I want you to ask yourself, what have I been tolerating that is quietly teaching the world that my boundaries don't matter? What have I been excusing because it's easier than standing up? And how much longer am I willing to sacrifice my peace for someone else's comfort? It's time to stop tolerating what diminishes you. It's time to stop lowering your standard. Because when you stop begging, apologizing, and shrinking to fit into someone else's version of respect, you start living the life you were meant to live. A life where your voice matters, your needs matter, and your worth is non-negotiable. You know, a lot of people talk about setting boundaries, about standing up for themselves, about saying no when something doesn't feel right. And most of the time, we think that once we've said it, once we've spoken our truth, that's it. Problem solved, right? But here's the reality: boundaries without action are just words. Words alone don't change behavior. Words alone don't protect your heart. Words alone don't teach anyone anything. I remember a time when I told a colleague, firmly, politely, that I couldn't take on yet another project. I explained my workload, I explained my limits, I even explained the reasons why. And what happened? The next week, the same request came again. And I found myself frozen, unsure, afraid of confrontation, afraid of disappointing. And I said yes. Again, that's when I realized setting a boundary once isn't enough. Boundaries need reinforcement. They need courage behind them. They need action. Otherwise, people don't learn. They don't adjust. And silently, slowly, you teach them it's okay to ignore your needs. It's not easy. In fact, it's terrifying. Because speaking up, enforcing your limits, saying no, all of that can feel uncomfortable. Sometimes it even feels lonely. You worry about conflict. You worry about rejection. You worry that if you assert yourself, people will leave. And maybe they will. And maybe that's the point. Every time you let someone cross a line and stay silent, you're telling them that their discomfort matters more than your peace. And over time, that erodes your self-respect. That erodes your courage. That erodes your ability to even recognize what's okay and what's not. I've learned that courage isn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Most of the time, courage is small, quiet, steady. It's the gentle but firm, "No, this isn't okay." Repeat it over and over until people start to understand. It's showing up for yourself in every interaction, even when it's awkward, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you fear judgment. And here's the magic: once you start enforcing your boundaries, once you start taking action to uphold your standards, something shifts inside you. You stop feeling like a victim of circumstances. You stop feeling powerless. You start walking through life with a sense of clarity, integrity, and peace. The truth is, people will always test boundaries, some consciously, some unconsciously. But when your boundaries are backed by action, by consistency, by courage, you teach the world a very important lesson: you are not negotiable. Your peace is not negotiable. Your worth is not negotiable. It's scary. It's uncomfortable. It's sometimes lonely. But it is also liberating. Because boundaries without action are just lines in the sand. Boundaries with action are the foundation of a life where respect, love, and authenticity are not optional. They are required. And that, my friends, is the difference between surviving in the world and thriving in it. Most of us spend a lot of time worrying about how others treat us. We wonder if people like us, if they respect us, if they see our value. But here's the truth. The way you treat yourself sets the example for the world. I didn't fully understand this for a long time. I used to think self-worth was about achievements, about being liked, about proving I was enough to the people around me. I worked hard to earn respect, to earn love, to earn attention. And yet, somehow I still felt invisible in my own life. It took me years of trial and error, of heartbreak and disappointment, to realize that the world doesn't determine your worth. You do. You teach people how to treat you by how you show up for yourself. If you constantly apologize for existing, if you minimize your feelings, if you put everyone else's needs before your own until you're empty, you're sending a message to the world. This is what is acceptable. This is the standard. And the world will rise to that standard every single time. I remember a season when I kept pushing myself to accommodate everyone else. I said yes when my heart whispered no. I overextended myself to be helpful, to be liked, to avoid conflict. And slowly, I began to disappear under the weight of other people's expectations. And then one day, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Not the version I showed to the world, but the version who had been neglected, ignored, and silenced. And in that moment, I realized something vital. The way you treat yourself is the blueprint for how the world will treat you. If you respect yourself, people will learn to respect you. If you protect your energy, people will learn to honor your space. If you speak kindly to yourself, people will learn that harsh words have no place in your life. Self-worth is not arrogance. It's not pride. It's quiet courage. It's getting out of bed each day and choosing yourself, even when the world seems to demand otherwise. It's saying, I deserve love, respect, and peace, and living that truth consistently. And here's the most beautiful part: when you start treating yourself with integrity, something incredible happens. You start attracting people who already see your value. You stop begging for respect because you're living it. You stop shrinking to fit into someone else's narrative because you've finally stepped into your own. So, tonight, if you take one thing from this, let it be this: self-worth is not optional. You cannot outsource it. You cannot borrow it from someone else. You cannot negotiate it away to keep the peace. You set the standard by how you treat yourself, and the world will follow. Because the truth is, people don't just treat you how you let them. They treat you how you show yourself they can. I used to think that setting standards meant being hard, rigid, or unkind. I thought it meant pushing people away or closing myself off. And for a long time, that belief kept me small. It kept me quiet. It kept me shrinking to make others comfortable. But here's the truth I've learned: setting the standard is not an act of anger or ego. It is an act of love for yourself, love for the people around you, and love for the relationships you want to nurture. When you set a standard, you're saying, this is how love looks here. This is how respect sounds here. This is how kindness feels in my world. You're not punishing anyone. You're clarifying the terms of connection. You're offering the people in your life a choice to step up, meet the standard, and join me in a space of honesty and care, or step aside. I remember a season when I was constantly drained by relationships that took more than they gave. I tolerated behaviors that chipped away at my self-respect. And slowly, I realized that by tolerating these things, I was teaching the world that my boundaries were negotiable, that my worth was optional, that my peace could be traded for convenience or approval. It was terrifying to start setting a real standard. I worried people would leave. I worried they would misunderstand me. I worried that being firm would be mistaken for unkindness. But here's the irony: the people who couldn't meet my standard weren't leaving my life. They were making room for the people who were always meant to be there. And the people who could meet it, they didn't resent it. They didn't resist it. They respected it because they respected me. They loved me more deeply because I had the courage to show them how love and respect looked in my world. Setting the standard isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself. Your actions, your responses, your willingness to uphold what you know you deserve. It's about saying no to what diminishes you and yes to what nourishes your soul. And over time, setting standards becomes an act of liberation. You stop shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. You stop pretending to be small so the world feels safe. You stop giving pieces of yourself away just to be tolerated, liked, or accepted. The people who truly belong in your life won't be offended by your standards. They'll rise to meet them. They'll honor them. They'll love you more fiercely because you've shown them the blueprint for how to love you rightly. So tonight, I want you to walk away knowing this. When you finally stop lowering your standards, when you finally stop shrinking, when you finally start demanding respect for yourself, you are not being difficult. You are being courageous. You are being kind to yourself and to the people who deserve to love the real you. Because setting the standard is not a threat. It is an invitation to step into authentic, wholehearted connection. And it is the greatest gift you can give, not just to others, but to yourself. So tonight, if you remember nothing else, remember this: you are the standard. You are the example of how love should feel, how kindness should sound, and how respect should look. Every boundary you set whispers, "I am worthy." Every standard you uphold says, "I'm no longer available for pain disguised as love." So don't shrink. Don't soften the truth of who you are to fit where you no longer belong. Because people will treat you how you let them. And it's time to teach them who you are. Thank you.